Somebody's birthday. Is anybody here?
It is.
Oh, happy birthday.
Oh, today? Oh, come on.
I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is City Council, Monday, August 5th, 2024. Roll call, please.
Aaron Miller,
Here.
Tracy Snyder,
Here.
Jen Mazias,
Here.
Tom Nymus,
Here.
Dave Anderson, John Hopkins,
Here.
Jared Trimbo,
Here.
quorum is met.
Thank you. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our next item is approval of minutes from the City Council meeting, July 8th, 2024.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it. Motion by Tom, second by Tracy. Any questions, comments, edits? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is approval of monthly expenditures via roll call vote.
I'll make a motion to approve the expenditures.
I'll second it.
Motion by Tom, second by Darren. Roll call vote, please.
Jared Trimbo,
Yes.
John Hopkins,
Yes.
Tom Nymus,
Yes.
Jen Mazias,
Yes.
Tracy Snyder,
Yes.
Aaron Miller,
Yes.
All right. Motion passes. Next item is public comment. Is anyone here tonight to give public comment? If so, please step forward. Anyone online
there's someone online, but
not wishing to give public comment? Karen?
My name is Karen Novacek. I reside at 610 East 4th Street. Madam Mayor, members of the Common Council. Scott Kluger has served as Washburn City Administrator for 17 years. During this time, he has worked with a number of mayors and city council members who have made policy decisions, and Scott has been very successful in implementing them. While the policies and accomplishments during his tenure are too numerous to list, all have had a significant impact on our community. In addition, Scott has been effective in identifying key issues and key opportunities to be considered by the mayor and city council. I've worked with Scott for over 5 years during my tenure on the city council. I observed Scott always available to explain complex issues, available to deal simultaneously with details of current tasks, and also to focus on future opportunities. His skill in developing the city's budget and balancing needs and resources has been exceptional. In my opinion, Scott has been an excellent City of Washburn administrator. And on a personal note, Scott, I will miss you, and I wish you the very best in your future. A final comment to the mayor and city council. I'm sure you are aware how important your role in leadership will be during this period of transition. I encourage you to think about, discuss, and identify together the key priorities and future goals for our city, so that in working together, you provide clear direction and support to our next city administrator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else here for public comment? Seeing none, we will move on. So the next item is mayoral announcements, proclamations, and appointments. I do not have any formal proclamations tonight. As far as announcements go, it is indeed Scott's last meeting, and that is something that I've been avoiding thinking about, so I don't have anything necessarily prepared to say at this time, but we will be having a get-together to send him off, and expect some details coming soon on that. I believe it's going to be on the 15th. And that's all I know for now. It might be some sort of a little potluck thing we might do that afternoon, so details to follow. None of us want to admit that you're actually and then it's also Tony's birthday. Happy birthday, Tony. And it's also, I believe, Ken Johnson's 25th anniversary with the city. Of course, and 22 of those years have been as chief. That was an unexpected promotion for him when there was a tragic incident and he took over as chief. So for 22 years, he's been the chief of police here. And I know his retirement is on the horizon, but if you run into him, he's still here for another, I don't know, year or so. So make sure you wish him a happy anniversary. And then as far as an appointment, I do have a recommendation for an appointment to the Parks Committee. And I believe you have a copy of the application there. There were 2 applicants, which was very nice to see. Both very qualified individuals in general. This person specifically more qualified in some technical aspects that I think will help the Parks Committee in future project planning. He's a DNR forester and looking for ways to get involved in the community. This is a perfect fit, and he's open to that. And I also spoke with the other candidate and confirmed that she is available for perhaps another opportunity that might come up in the future. So that's really great that she's flexible with her desire to get involved in the community. Doesn't necessarily have to be on the Parks Committee. So I'll keep her on my speed dial. And so we have another local Olympian. The other applicant is an Olympian who moved here from Milwaukee a few years ago. And that's pretty cool, adding to our local Olympians in the area. He's a speed skater. So with that, I will look for approval of that appointment.
I'll make a motion to approve that appointment.
I'll second that.
Motion by Tom, second by Jared. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And I let him know that he would be contacted just with some details of when the meeting, I think he's gone for a little bit, he might not be here for the first meeting.
Oh,
But if you could be contacted with some information on
okay.
joining the committee, that would be great. And with that, we have our next agenda item, which is discussion and action on Bayfield Street Project Phase 2 updated plans for sidewalk and turn lane into Memorial Park. Just tab 1 of your packets. And I believe we have a guest here who will help talk to us about this and explain it in more detail if you'd like. And Scott can introduce it as well.
I'll start you off here a little bit. So just a little bit of background here. Tony wrote the memo. I'll talk about it. So while phase 1 has been going on, we have been continuing to discuss and plan for phase 2, which is to begin in 2027. Again, just to remind everyone, the reason for that delay is because of funding and our ability to be able to apply for the funding that is necessary for the city to do its portion of the work. Some of those programs you can only apply for once every 3 years. And so that is the reason for that lag. That originally, we were hoping originally to do it in 2026, but we can push that to 2027. So we're continuing to have these discussions. The WSDOT is at a point where they're trying to finalize some things, and they will soon be having a public presentation regarding their plans, but there's a few key things that we want to make sure get nailed down first. And we've learned a few things along the way with this phase 1 project as well. And so trying to put all that knowledge and information together, and we have a couple suggestions and changes from when we last discussed this in earnest. One of the things is that has changed is before we were talking about the possibility of sidewalk on the what I'll call the north side of the highway. And when you last discussed that, you weren't too keen on extending that sidewalk down to 8th Street. I'm not exactly sure all the reasons, besides costs and so forth on that. Because I do believe that part of that would have been like a reconstruction of the road into an urban type setting. That's coming back to me. But as we've been looking at preliminary, some of the utility work that will also be occurring, and some of the conflicts that the utility work is going to have with the stormwater system and so forth. Right now, kind of the plan is to have this, the city's storm sanitary sewer actually on the south side of the highway, possibly off the actual travel lane and into that right of way. And it opens an opportunity to have a sidewalk on the south side of the highway. And because of the work that needs to be done, it may be advantageous, and we'll get into some of the details here, for the city to consider having a sidewalk on that side, and at the same time, want to discuss the turning radius going into Memorial Park. So with us this evening, we first of all know Jerry, Public Works Director, but we also have Matt Dickinson from the state of Wisconsin Department of Transportation. You are a supervisor of some sorts, if I can't quite remember your official title.
Project manager.
Project manager. So he comes with lots of knowledge and experience of past projects and how these things work, and has been helpful in holding
with all the work done on phase one here as well. So just want to open the discussion of the potential of that sidewalk and then also that turning radius that goes into Memorial Park. And Tony, if you can pull up the map of that area on the screen, I think that would be helpful for our discussion. Keep in mind on that turning radius, when you're pulling into Memorial Park, there is that archway object, and I don't know too much of the history behind that other than those pillars, I believe, were from part of a previous development, where that archway comes and why there was that blue Kmart special light on top. I really have no idea, but it hasn't worked in years. I keep joking with Jerry that, that was supposed to be activated whenever, whatever. But anyway, so that object at this point in time is intended to remain there. That object does cause some of the larger RVs that like to visit the park some challenges. They sometimes have to find a different route to get around and either go down the Superior or one of the other streets and go down Memorial Park Drive to access the park because that it's low. The decision of what you want to do with that is yours. That's the DOT is not going to want to address that issue, but it may impact your discussion and what you want to do here. Because having that turn lane, in the DOT's opinion, is really not necessary based on the volume of traffic. And when you have that turn lane there, there's a tendency for somebody to want to turn right into the street on that right-hand side. But with that archway there, people do need to aim for the center of that road anyway. So that turn lane doesn't really provide, it's kind of awkward, essentially. And that's a concern. So that's kind of the background of the issue and discussion. And on that sidewalk, I'm not sure we have actual costs known at this point of what the city's portion may be, other than to say that if you're looking for a sidewalk to connect all the way out to Superior Avenue, this would be more advantageous to do it as part of this project than to do it at a future time, because then it will be even more expensive. So we understand that costs are a concern, and this, just to kind of give you that idea that phase one is costing the city over $5 million. Phase two is going to be the same, if not more. So these are expensive projects, and understand that, but also looking at, is it more advantageous to take care of some of these things that make it a nicer community now, as opposed to pushing that off into the future. So that's what you get to weigh.
When you say connect to Superior, the road, the intersection that we see up there with Memorial Drive, that's not Superior.
No.
You're talking like over by the,
Up there.
okay. Which is basically two more blocks. Three?
Yes, because Memorial Park is at 6th
Six.
here. So when we were looking at the other side, we were looking at going up to 8th,
Yep.
which is here. Then the intersection of Superior is up here.
Okay. Gotcha.
Would there be a proposal for a crosswalk at each of those intersections? Specifically, what I see with the scenario housing development, if the sidewalk's on the south side of the street.
Well, correct, and that's why we had originally discussed the north side, because of the proposed housing development up here. But
But there's a wetland between 3rd Avenue and
over in that area between Third Avenue and that housing, senior housing on the north side. There's a wetland in there. There's cattails in there.
You mean up here?
That was one of the reasons why they said no on the first.
Oh,
in
down,
here.
down
So they
here.
didn't want curb and gutter on that section.
Curb and gutter, okay. Got it. Perhaps our guests can
Yeah.
chime in on some of these.
If you don't mind stepping up to the mic,
Over here?
at the podium, yeah, that'd be great. And if you have to talk right into that mic, so people online can hear you as well. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just let me give you a little bit of background. My name is Matt Dickinson. I've worked for Wistad for 25 years, project manager for 12, 13 years now. I've been involved in a lot of projects in the area. City of Ashland, I had several design projects, and also just delivered the PS&E for the next year's Ellis Avenue project. I actually designed the first go around of that, so I've been around a while. Anyway, I've had urban projects in Hayward, Ashland, Mellon, just last year. So I serve both as construction project manager and design PM. I am kind of helping Jess Balker, if you remember your project manager from West Ave for this phase one. I am the construction manager for phase one because she's out of Eau Claire. But I'm kind of seeing what's going on here, and I'm also trying to help her with the design of phase two to make things a little more easier, a little more logic, and give you guys some opportunities to improve upon your community and what I see in other areas. As far as what Scott's talking about, I'll talk about the turn lane first. That turn lane is, in any community when WISDOT comes in, we look at features that are there, and they don't just automatically get put back in. There has to be warrants for various things that we build because it costs extra money. It's extra pavement out there, okay? Now, communities can fund things themselves that we will build and put in our designs, but obviously that's where the cost share comes in. Now, for this particular turn lane there at, you said it was 6th Street, correct? Or entrance into the park?
6th Avenue.
6th Avenue, sorry. You know, based upon my visits here weekly, you know, I've done some looking there and waiting and seeing how many cars and volumes you have there. That turn lane doesn't meet WISDOT warrants for funding. It may be a busy spot for Washburn, but when it comes to what our manual says for traffic counts, it's not necessary, okay? I think I counted 2 vehicles in 20 minutes, and we're in the peak summer season here. So it probably was a good idea or a nice idea in the past because you thought you had some larger vehicles to get in there, get them out of the traffic, but even the speed limit there is 35 miles an hour. You know, I have a chart that we use in our facilities development manual that shows when you meet warrants for left turn or right turn lanes, excuse me. We're not even close to meeting traffic warrants for right turn lane. So WISDOT then looks at that and says, yeah, that's not something that we're willing to put back. I looked at it further and I said, you know, it's probably a benefit to not have it for people making that right turn into the park. Because you have those stone pillars there, if a vehicle can get closer to center line before it makes that right turn, it can get squared up better to get through that narrow arch. And I believe there's only 18 feet of room between there, so it's like 2 9-foot lanes. So if somebody's coming out, somebody almost has to wait for them to get out before they can get in. So you don't want somebody turning from the right position as much, you know, as far as they can, because then they can't get squared up when they get through, and their trailer risks swiping one of the, you know, the pillar on the way in. So anyway, I see that as a benefit to get rid of it. Obviously, it's not something WISDOT would fund anyway. The third thing is, you know, if you're considering a sidewalk on that south side, which is something that I kind of brought up to Scott early on, saying,
The sidewalk on the north side is really useless because it's so low lying that it floods. And I saw it underwater here several times this spring. How to rectify that? I mean, you'd have to bring in a lot of fill. You'd be filling in people's front yards. You'd be cutting a lot of trees. That's not a location where a sidewalk should be based upon the terrain here, because it's going from higher to lower. So you kind of want to put your sidewalk on the opposite side of the street if you were to have one, just to fit the terrain. Okay? And then you could make a normal ditch on the north side, which would carry water and help drainage. I mean, our pavement out there, our roadway is definitely suffering from, I guess, a long time of buildup of material, and it doesn't drain well. So we're getting soft spots and the pavement's breaking up. Okay. Looking at that sidewalk, WISDOT, we participate in sidewalk in terms of funding. And wherever we are taking sidewalk out and the community has it, we are required to put it back in. So here's an opportunity for WISDOT to replace that sidewalk on the south side, wherever you have it on the north side. Now, so there's some missing gaps in there that you guys will have to fund. But as long as there's, and there is some sidewalk way out there near Memorial Drive right at the end, that it's in the woods and it's covered over, but those are areas WISDOT can participate in. We can fund that because we will take that out and put in a ditch. We need that ditch to carry water longitudinally to the main culverts that drain across the roadway so that things aren't wet. You mentioned that wetland up there. I saw that wet hole and water comes over the back of the curb. That is just poor drainage. I'm guessing there's an old pipe under there that's plugged, or something is plugged, because water shouldn't be sitting there. It's getting into our pavement structure and it's ruining our subgrade, causing the pavement to decay and get broken up. So anyway, I think this all kind of works together to build a road that's going to be solid. You guys will have the option to have some pedestrian facilities there on the south side. With that turn lane gone, it doesn't push the sidewalk out even further. If that turn lane was there, that sidewalk would have to cut in, and it might require some real estate, which could be, I'm not sure on the exact funding of, could that be on the city of Washburn? It could be, because your turn lane is pushing the sidewalk out further. We might ask you for that money. So we get rid of the turn lane. I can pretty much tell you, you don't have any costs associated with that particular area of sidewalk. It'll help it fit.
So if we decided, yes, we wanted to do the sidewalk on the south side, as long as DOT is funding all the portions where there was sidewalk on the north side, then we just have to decide if we're gonna go any further beyond that. Is that where the sidewalk ends currently? The Coach L. Silverstein?
Well, you guys would have to decide, that you're going to fill in the gaps with your funding.
Sure.
We would put in under a project under the SMA, the state municipal agreement. You guys would have just those sidewalk panels, basically.
There's sections on the north side all the way to Superior Ave.
Okay.
It's just intermittent
Right.
sections.
That's
And there's
all
some
water.
buried sections that even go between where 8th Avenue comes and Superior Ave goes on the south side of the street.
Now, when Scott was talking about sewer, sanitary sewer, Jerry and Scott told me that you guys are in phase 2, going to be replacing your sanitary. Sanitary sewer is problematic for WISDOT. It's when it's in the roadway. Obviously, when construction crews come to dig that up, it leaves a soft spot, okay? Now, not all of this roadway here, the settling over time of the digging up that was done. Now, our concrete is going to end at the urban section where the curb and gutter ends, which I'm not exactly sure where that is. Is it?
I think that's around 3rd.
That's where our concrete pavement ends, and we will be asphalt from there out to Memorial, okay? Now, asphalt doesn't bridge that disruption so much of digging down 12 feet in the center of your road. So WSDOT has very significant concerns that we're going to get a finished product that's going to ride, well, it may ride okay for the first year, but as it settles, and I think you guys have been to Superior on that realignment there in, just outside of Poplar by Rappers Riverside, it undulates like this. That's what happens when you mess around in clay. 6th Street in Ashland, same thing happened there. So I told Scott, WSDOT wants that sanitary line out of the roadway. The old one can stay there, abandoned in place, filled with concrete. Put it on the shoulder. That way, in the future, if you ever needed to get up, you're not disrupting traffic, and it's not going to create a long-term maintenance headache for us while you dig that 12 feet of clay out and try and pack it back, because we don't get good compaction with our current methods, contractors. So that's just from the urban area to Memorial is where we're asking to have the sanitary sewer moved to the right shoulder point. Out, I think we talked about it, it's 8 feet off the edge of asphalt, somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay. And that sidewalk would go just outside of that. Sidewalk is just on the surface, the sanitary is down 12 feet or so.
Would that not run all the way to Superior? Or is the current sanitary sewer that goes down there already outside of the roadway?
It does run down the center line all the way to Superior, and so.
So the proposal to put the just so I can clear, put the sanitary sewer replacement is outside of the roadway, the entire way down the Superior, not just Memorial.
From the end of the urban section,
Yep.
end of the concrete,
Yep.
from 3rd to Memorial, put it in the shoulder, the south side shoulder, rather than down the center line.
Is
Yes.
that all, right away?
Aaron, question?
So you said to vacate the existing lines, would DOT be the ones to fill the existing lines with concrete, or would that fall upon the city?
That falls upon your utility road, yes.
So if we're doing that all the way down to Superior already, then it makes sense to put a sidewalk on top of it all the way down. Is that what I'm hearing?
Sidewalk is just outside of that line. I mean, you have manholes that come up every, I don't know, what, 300, 200 feet or something?
When you say just outside, I'm still not following. So like,
It wouldn't be directly over.
No.
So the sanitary line would run between the shoulder of the road and the sidewalk. It wouldn't be underneath the sidewalk, it would be off to the side.
Yeah.
And where that's actually gonna be placed, we won't know until those decisions are made, the design team starts putting it all together. Then we'll take a look at how this is all gonna fit together. And
Right.
But
So-
the idea is to keep the manhole sanitary line outside between the shoulder and the sidewalk.
Scott, did you have something?
Just to point out that in our discussions with the sidewalk, and this is at Jerry's request as well, typically the sidewalk is going to be 4 feet wide, but I believe, Jerry, you have requested a 5-foot sidewalk in that area. The city will have some decisions to make as you move along as to how you're going to want to maintain this, but if you ever move back to, and the issue here is going to be, and you're going to have this as further sidewalk discussions, with the sidewalk that close to the highway and with the plows and so forth, it's going to be very difficult for those property owners to be able to always clear their sidewalk, particularly when you have a winter like 2 winters ago with all of that snow. Last year wasn't bad at all, but 2 winters ago we had a lot. I mean, I personally experienced this myself. And so when you have salted, wet snow from the highway and that gets plowed right onto to a nearby sidewalk, that's very difficult. So if you ever have the city in a situation where it needs to clear the sidewalk, city equipment is going to need that 5 foot as opposed to the 4 foot. And But that extra foot would probably be
City costs.
city costs, so that would have to be factored in the formula.
No, our Woodstock standard sidewalk is 5 feet.
Is it 5?
Great.
Was I wrong on
Yeah,
that?
we're asking for 6.
Sorry.
Because we're 5 foot, so everything we have is literally 5 foot wide. So when you bury the snow on top and you try to run down it to clear it, you only have to move a couple inches one way or another and you're off it. So we had asked WisDOT if they would conceivably go 6 foot wide, which is gonna make it easier for us to, if we have to maintain it, clear it, go straight shot down, we're able to utilize that with our equipment, without worrying about damaging front yards and properties and sliding off, so.
And that extra foot would be city cost, because Woodstock is held to what our standard is. That's what we provide in every community. Unless you're right behind the curb and gutter, and then we provide the 6 foot.
So I had the concept right, but my measurements were off, so.
So would the sidewalk, if it were to be on the south side, come all the way down into the city then, on that same south side? It would all be on that one side?
And I believe at Third Street is where your sidewalk ends on both sides, correct? So
Correct.
yes, we would continue on from Third Street, right where you see that sidewalk on the south side there. It would go straight across the street, yep, and keep on trucking.
Okay.
And Tony, if you can go back down, if I believe, and this is gonna have to be re-verified, and we're gonna have to check the record on this, but I believe it's from Second, from the Ironworks, where you have all sidewalk and concrete terrace coming back this way. I believe that is your previous decision that you had made. I believe you did have a,
It was what is currently existing, the decision was to keep it the same.
correct. So, yeah, so that's where that would be, and for bump outs, we did a partial bump out at Third. And I believe that was, we didn't do one at Sixth, if I recall. But we'd have to check the record on that one too. I can't remember.
I think we talked about that, but
We talked 3 different locations.
Yeah.
Central, Third, and Sixth, but I believe Third was the only one that had a partial bump out.
Is that going, that's where it goes to?
Correct.
Are you saying we're not doing concrete terraces on the north side?
That's Ironworks.
That's Ironworks.
Correct. So everything from the Ironworks back this way will have concrete terrace.
On both sides.
Yes.
Tom?
Now, with the sidewalk being that close, is that gonna lower the speed limit through there?
The sidewalk isn't that close. We don't know exactly what the offset is. But I mean, the speed limit there is already 35 and we don't have any plans to change that.
Okay.
So if we do the sidewalk on the south side all the way to Superior Avenue, in that space, speed limit increases to 45.
Yeah.
What are the DOT regulations for that regarding crosswalks? If people are crossing to the south side of the highway to get to this sidewalk, is that possible or what happens there?
Where would that be at? Where would be the crosswalk?
Whether it's probably, well, up to council, I just don't know if it's a possibility. I foresee realistically one at 6th Ave, right at Memorial Park, and one at 8th.
Third Avenue, 6th, 8th.
Well, Third, there already is one. So the additions here with this discussion would be 6th and 8th. I don't think it'd be absolutely necessary at 7th where it comes through.
Correct. And that's why I brought up the bump
Yeah.
out
Yep.
issue, because right now you only have that at Third.
Yep.
I'm not in our traffic area and I don't know what the specifics are in terms of crosswalks. I know communities apply for them and we grant them in lots of instances. Whether that speed has to be, something less than 45, I'm not sure.
So yeah, currently 6th Ave is 35 Eighth is 45.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of examples in my head here where I've seen crosswalks at 45 miles an hour.
Well, there's one in
Ashland.
the city of Ashland coming in on Highway 2.
Yeah, down by
Right
Maslowski
at the,
Beach.
yep, at the walking trail
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, so I don't think it's a problem. I mean, obviously, in terms of if somebody wants speed reduced, that's something that has to go through our traffic area. That's not something that we can do in the project development area, if you will.
But I guess what I wanted to confirm for council here is it's not impossible to get a crosswalk
No,
in these areas if we do say, yeah, let's at least consider sidewalk on the south side.
yeah, you should be able to get crosswalks. I did want to point out one more thing that I noted during our review last time that could save you guys some money. But I can't talk with it without maybe somebody pointing or getting it on the block with the DNR building. Yes, right there. That's the DNR building. Where is their?
No,
No, keep going to the left.
There you go.
One more.
That one.
Right there.
This one.
Right. Now, that particular block, DNR is changing some things, and they're gonna have a big opening along there for a reconfiguration of their garage and vehicles. So if you look at the entirety of that block, it's wider, but there is no parking. Okay, so you guys, municipalities are on the hook for any parking areas or extra pavement width areas, 100% municipal cost. On this block, I said, okay, it doesn't look like there's anybody parking here. DNR is going to really widen out their throat through there. There's not going to be many parking stalls to begin with. So why don't we narrow up the pavement for that block to match the block that is further to the north? You go a little further to the north there. See how that narrows up a little bit there? We would match that. No parking, because like I said, DNR is going to have that whole block, opened up anyway. And that would save you guys cost in terms of paying for that parking lane that currently is there.
Oh, you're talking parking on the highway.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I'm just talking on the left side there as we're looking at it, the DNR side. Yep, that whole block, we narrow that up to match. It's not as narrow as a rural section because that next block to the north still has curb and gutter, but we narrow it up to match that. Then you guys don't have any costs involved with that.
Yes, please.
So there's parking right there in that block right now on the highway?
On the south side.
There's a car parked right there.
Okay.
And they would still be parking on the south side.
Still be parking on the south side, yep. But that block is going to be rendered really useless for parking with DNR's big wide. They've applied for an access permit there, and it's like 50-some, 60-some feet wide.
So like a driveway coming onto?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then they got the other one right there. They're going to be making changes, and then the slope that they're dealing with. I said, well, if we narrow this up, their slope into their driveway would also help them. So that's something to consider.
Thank you for the suggestion. Okay, so no decisions tonight on anything need to be made, or?
Well,
We have to do a discussion and action.
I would recommend if you are comfortable making decisions, that will be helpful so that they can finish up their plans because they're going to be scheduling public hearings soon.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
So the south side of the highway from Memorial Park to Superior Street, like dotted with houses, and there's like, I understand we want connectivity all the way down, I just wonder, from like a plowing perspective and from everything, like, is it really, I see a lot of people walking from Memorial Park downtown, and I understand we're having a housing unit. We were comfortable before with that housing unit using the street up, kind of coming down to the highway. I just don't know how many people are truly gonna cross the street and walk a highway all that distance. And if it's really that valuable to put in the investment of a sidewalk past Memorial Park. And I just want to have a conversation, hear other people's thoughts on it, because I'm just curious.
I think Birthday Boy has some thoughts.
So I guess the advantage I see of that is we, at some point, hopefully soon, will have a graded trail through here.
Yeah.
With access along Superior Street Avenue, then we could actually have a walking route.
Well, that is
And I
trail.
can tell you from personal experience that there's a lot of traffic from Superior to 8th Avenue. People walking, running to cut across.
I used to
onto
make
that,
my daughter do
yes.
it really fast,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, I do see that. I see the loop becoming, I can see that there being a loop there. I just feel like,
At some point, were we talking about, instead of sidewalk, putting in some sort of a paved trail that would be like, you know, they have up in Red Cliff along side of the road? Not a sidewalk, but a paved.
Asphalt trail.
Asphalt
Asphalt trail, they have one of those at Bad River too.
Yeah, I mean, is that a possibility?
that to me seems more, I don't know, more appealing than, I don't know the difference between the two, and I'm sure you're like, oh no.
Yeah, please, please, let's hear it.
Give them the bad news.
Oh, no.
Yeah, when you have a section of road that doesn't have curb and gutter, you do see those paths more than you see sidewalks. Now, a path we would pay, WISDOT would fund what it would cost for a 5-foot sidewalk, okay? Anything over and above that, what's the cost difference between a 5-foot wide sidewalk and a trail that is, I don't know what width you would want, maybe 8 feet, something like
The
that.
one at Bad River is 8 feet wide.
Is that 8 feet wide?
Yes.
We could, we'll give you the money, what it costs for us to put in a 5-foot sidewalk, and if whatever the difference is, you guys would pick up. So, there, in terms of width, there is enough right of way there to have either, okay? And, we're going to be extending some of those culverts that cross the highway so that there is gonna be a kind of a shoulder out there. So either one.
And then at what point would that theoretical paved path turn back into a sidewalk?
Back at third,
Back to third?
you're back into the curb and gutter section there.
But what's the cost difference between running blacktop trail and
Well,
a
they-
concrete
they-
sidewalk?
they'd have to
Because
figure that out.
That would be part of the bid process, you get bid it both ways and see. Now, WISDOT, you have a standard price for the sidewalk, trying to give us an idea of what the funding would be there, and then we can get pricing on it, it's not a big deal. We're talking 3 years from now, so.
Yeah, I think one of the things is accessibility, from the new housing unit, because it's nice for them to know that there's always gonna be something plowed and accessible if there's like wheelchairs or different things for them to come from, there to our community. And so, I mean, I do see some advantages from that standpoint, but I'm just trying to think of that very large sidewalk or trail on the side of the road all the way down there, and how much use it truly will get.
Okay, and then Tracy, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, you design streets all the time. What do you recommend? What do you think would work best there? a sidewalk. I mean, to me, it's a public safety issue. We want to be walkable. We want to develop a city where we encourage walkers in walking safely. And we have a new huge housing complex going in. And, you know, like Max said, I mean, you just apply for the pedestrian crossing. So, I mean,
I've
what do you
seen-
see being, working the best?
I think, you know, in a rural section, a trail, a path makes more sense. And that's what I've seen. I mean, you look at Ashland, they have a path. You look at Superior, they have a path. So sidewalk typically, the concrete 5-foot sidewalk typically is for more of your urban section where you have curb and gutter. Not to say that you can't use sidewalk in a rural, you know, cross section where you just have shoulders. So I mean, that would be fine too. I mean, if cost is an issue, well, 5-foot sidewalk is probably a little cheaper than an asphalt trail of 8 feet wide.
But if we're looking at the 6-foot sidewalk,
True, yeah.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
I just think about the plowing, and I think that's what, like, one of our main thing is like keeping that accessible for walking in the winter. That's one of our biggest challenges. And so, because it's plowing and it's crossed by the highway, is there enough room to, I don't think there is, but is there enough room to put a trail and then do some kind of tree or vegetation between that trail and the, I don't think there's enough room to do both. And Jerry's shaking his head. I just wanted to ask, because you can visualize, because that's what some of it is in Ashland, and that's what some of it is in Bad River too, right? It kind of snakes along the highway, but then there's vegetation between them, so it's a little bit easier to keep, you know, all the stuff from the highway from the plowing in the winter from going onto that trail. That's, I was hoping, but I don't think it's that way.
You know, in an urban section, you always have the plows pushing the snow and they flop it over on the sidewalk and people have to keep shoveling, you know, when the plow comes by again, or if the city has a program to do the sidewalks, that's great. Urban areas can be difficult. It depends upon where you're at. In Ashland, when we designed that, Ellis Avenue, we had enough boulevard space to get that sidewalk 8 feet off of the curb. And so there's enough snow storage room in the middle there.
Yeah.
Except for maybe 2 years ago when.
Snowfall.
Yeah. This trail is going to be a ways off of the edge of the shoulder, and the speed limit through there is only 35 or 45. The plows can't wing that stuff off that far at 35 or 45.
You want to ask?
I mean, they can get it. 45, they can carry it. You know, there's likely to be, you know, some, but for the distance that we're thinking for that trail, I mean, there's enough snow storage in between the trail and the road where I don't see them constantly, or I don't see that whole area being void of snow in the winter when they're plowing. That they'll be plowing the snow off the road, there'll be a hump of snow, and then there'll be the trail. If we get a lot of snow, that snow is gonna build up and come over onto the trail because they gotta throw it.
what would the city's responsibility be for plowing if it were a trail versus a sidewalk? That's a Jerry question, probably.
Yeah, so, you know, he's laughing, he said trail, because I said to him, we're gonna want a trail. If it's a trail, you know, we're set up, you know, to, my thought process with this moving forward is, you know, with the landowners and stuff, and being a rural section and plowing and benching, I think that's something that the city's gonna have to more or less maintain, because we already take everything prior to that is kind of cleaned up on a basis on the snowstorm, because there's no snow storage. So, I mean, our whole concept, literally since I've been here, is gearing up to be able to handle this and deal with it. So that's why I was kind of adamant about the 6 foot wide, so we can literally get in there, get it bashed out, and be done with it.
And then one more question about curb and gutter. If it is a sidewalk, do we still need to make it curb and gutter?
No.
Any other questions that you have?
No, I just wanted to get folks' opinion on the trail type thing. Sounds like that might be a possibility.
So would you need to know now whether we wanted a trail versus a sidewalk, or just that we want to do something on the south side?
Correct, just give us an indication. Obviously, you're gonna have another kick at the can here when we come with the public meeting. And everybody will get a chance to look at the drawings and obviously you folks will hopefully be there as well. And so we can discuss at that time if there's any things you want to point out or whatnot, but this gives us an opportunity to at least get that on the plans. So
Okay.
that the visual is there.
Is there a motion that anyone would want to make to proceed with the planning for some sort of trail or sidewalk on the south side with crosswalks at 6th and 8th? Yeah,
How are you gonna do it or don't?
I'll make the motion,
okay.
proceed.
And second? Is there a
Yeah,
second?
did you want it a little more specific or?
I would.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Okay, for either, for sidewalks and trail off the Superior Avenue with crosswalks at 6th and 8th.
Okay.
Can I add one more thing as long as you're on making a motion? Do you want to say you have no objection to the removal of the right turn lane going into Memorial?
No objection.
And just for clarification, for your purposes too, how about the utilities located outside of the roadway? Is that important right now that we're okay with that, or is that kind of assumed?
Yeah, you don't have to make a decision on that. We will be, when you apply for your utility permit, we will be encouraging your placement, and you guys work through that process with your consultant that designs your water and sewer. And we will be encouraging the placement of that out right on the right shoulder versus back down the center of the highway.
Okay. So in lieu of a right turn lane, proceeding with some sort of sidewalk.
Correct.
With crosswalks at 6 and
Yep.
8. Okay. Second, anyone?
A second.
Tracy? Any other questions, comments, or discussion here and Jerry?
I was gonna say, I don't know if Jerry's got an idea of working on getting some estimates. You said, I didn't know if you were starting that.
No, not until, I mean, that's why we kind of need to take a look at what we're doing. We go from there once we decide with some public input.
But I guess I'd be curious just to hear the cost difference between the 6-foot wide concrete sidewalk and
Oh, I'm sure we will.
We
And
can
the trail.
get some kind of number together.
Yeah.
A rough idea.
We're not quite at that decision point yet, but just the concept of doing something on that side, whether it's the DOT paid for 5-foot, or we decide to do 6-foot, or a wider trail.
Right.
Whatever that is.
You can still change your mind. I mean, we'll put it on the public information sheets. Everybody gets a chance to look at it, and if you say, yeah, well, we can't afford this. I don't know, we'll probably have good cost numbers by then, I would hope. So you'll be able to see the price of it and then see it on paper, see what it looks like, if it's functional. And then if you want to change your mind at that time and say, no, we're not doing any sidewalk, we'll take it off.
So, just a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So during the public meeting, when you have a price difference for 5-foot sidewalk, 6-foot sidewalk, and the other one would be a trail, could you price that all out? I think that would be important for the public.
Yeah, because to me, the reason I was asking the price is because that asphalt trail, that is a petroleum product.
Which is worse, concrete or petroleum?
I think the petroleum,
I don't know, concrete's pretty bad for the environment as well, so. Jerry?
Yeah, so, just, bring it to light. So the pedestrian crossings at 6 and 8 and the speed limit. So I talked to the transportation department because I got caught. Everybody knows we put a crosswalk in on 6th this spring. Yeah, I got busted. So, I got talked directly to the director for the transportation for as far as crosswalks and speed limits. So how it works is we do have, there's a form to fill out, and then you get a resolution requesting crosswalks at 6th and 8th. And then as far as the speed limit goes, just need a request from the city by resolution, to have the speed. They'll do a monitor of traffic flow and speed, and once you get those crosswalks in, you can formally request a reduction in the speed limit there and state reasons why and your concerns. They'll take a look at it, and if they feel as though it warrants it, they will reduce the speed limit. So that's how that kind of works.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much for your time tonight, coming and helping us understand that.
You bet.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, our next item is discussion and action on resolution 24-013, amending the 2024 capital budget for various revenues, expenses, and projects. Tab 2 of your packet. Scott, do you have anything to add to your memo?
So this one, this is essentially, with the general obligation borrowing that we did, but breaks it out into the various line items within the capital budget as to where we're spending that money. And then you'll note in my memo that we also have the landfill restoration project, which we had budgeted for that a couple of years ago, but that project just didn't happen. The town of Washburn was working on that. They asked us to kind of take that over this year, and especially with available clay dirt, which was tested and meets the specification requirements. Just briefly, what's going on out there. The city, the town of Washburn, and the town of Bayview have a shared landfill. We have the vast majority of the responsibility for it. Out in the town of Washburn, out on Maple Hill, I believe that landfill was closed sometime in the 80s. And, but there's ongoing monitoring of it and maintenance responsibility. And so each year it's tested and there are monitoring wells and so forth. And there has been some movement of contamination in that area. And if you go out there and look, some of the cap on the landfill is getting depressions in it because the landfill is settling. And so the project is to essentially smooth it out. And so we need to have clay type material that can be placed over those depressions to make it smooth so that the water, when it rains, runs off of the landfill and does not pool within those depressions, which then further leaches into the landfill itself, which will cause further movement of contamination. So that is the project. And with excess fill from our project, we've been working in various ways to get that out there and then placed so that it can be, we can just get that thing done. And it's kind of been languishing for the past couple of years. And I believe, if Jerry can confirm, once our contractor starts up here again now, they're about to start hauling it out there. And so I've added that back into the capital project because we had that money essentially in that fund balance. So.
So this is just making it accurate.
This is updating our budget with what is actually happening.
There's just one typo before we print out the resolution, if it gets approved, that will be sent. Okay. So we are looking for action on this resolution. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to pass resolution 2024-013.
I'll second that.
Motion by Tom, second by Jared. Any questions, comments, or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for cleaning that up. And next item, discussion and action on resolution 24-014, amending the 2024 operating budget and request to temporarily increase hours for administrative assistant position. This is tab 3 of your packet.
Okay, so I can explain this one. So I had looked at these issues. One, the city did enter a contract for a search firm. And so I have put that into the general fund budget amendment. I have requested a potential, and because we have a lot of variables that are occurring here. Will we have an interim person? Will we not? Trying to leave options open for the future for you. Unfortunately, I can't formally put that in the budget. You know, I know there will probably be some expenses, but if we amend that budget, you will lose your 2026 expenditure restraint fund. So I did confirm that. So, you know, this is one of these diabolical budget hiccups that, you know, that you spend too much, the state will take money away from you. So that's, yeah, I'm not sure you're going to get out of that going into the future, because I have, you know, recommended that you're going to need to do a referendum at this point in order to maintain the current level of services. Otherwise, you're looking at some serious cutbacks in multiple departments in the city, and you know, it's to the point, in my opinion, where it will all collapse. So this is the best I can do for now, but I do think that you have to keep your options open just to have adequate staff to keep the doors open for you.
So if we authorize temporarily increasing hours for the admin assistant position, or if we do an interim administrator position, we're going to lose our expenditure restraint.
No, you're not formally amending the budget. You're just overspending the budget. You're just going to have to find a way to squeeze the budget.
Gotcha.
Do we have savings because we're, like, obviously we're not paying you? Or
No, but we are paying out vacation or benefits.
You'll be paying out severance and all of that, and you assume that the replacement will probably have to be hired at a higher wage.
Mm-hmm. I just didn't know if there was like an interim chunk of time.
I don't believe that there's going to be anything significant there. The bottom line is, with all of this, costs are going to go up.
So we are looking for action on both of these items. One is to amend the operating budget so that we can cover the $15,000 for the firm hiring, and the other is to authorize temporarily increasing hours within our existing budget. So if anyone would care to make either of those motions or both? Tracy?
So I'll make a motion that we increase the budget by 15,000 to address, from the operating budget, to address the expenditures from consulting firm to seek a new administrator, as well as increase the hours of the administrative assistant position until a new administrator is hired, up to, can we say 40 hours a week?
I think we should specify that 40 hours a week, up to.
Okay, is there a second to
I'll
that?
second that.
Motion by Tracy, second by Tom.
One question, is
Jen,
it
go
just
ahead.
the administrative assistant position, or should we think about other?
Everyone else is full-time, I think, at this point, but everyone else is not.
Yep, yeah, everyone else's salary.
Salary. Okay. Just checking if there was anybody else.
Just slide in there to help out in the interim.
You know, you, depending on how this goes, you may want to have those discussions prior to the end of the year. I don't, it's impossible to predict how everything will pan out and happen.
Okay,
But,
thanks.
you know, if there are people who are going above and beyond during this period, you may want to consider that in the future.
Yeah, that's fine.
Gotcha.
Leaning towards is, I think like other staff positions are gonna have to.
Some sort of compensation for
Some
taking
kind of
on additional work.
compensation if we have to do additional work.
Okay, and we can look at that.
Yep. Just
Okay.
wanna put that out there. Thanks.
Good point, Darren.
Is there any, with their current hours now, is there any restrictions that we need to watch out for the full-time 40-hour a week?
Well,
I mean, I'm just based on their position being part-time.
so what happens is we allocate benefits based on their average hours. So if this would be maintained going into the future, that will be an increase in benefit costs as well. You know, retirement contribution is essentially a percentage of the wage and so forth. So that you pay more, you're paying more into that. Health insurance is kind of the tricky one. So,
We wouldn't need to amend the benefits based on a temporary increase in hours, is my understanding.
so I mean, I think it's a unique situation that was not anticipated at the beginning of the year. At this point, you're going to be muddling through as best you can. It's a matter of appropriately budgeting once things settle out and what the future will bring. That's how I would look at it.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And finally is a presentation by City Attorney Max Lindsay on open meeting / record laws. Open record.
You were in trouble. All sorts of stuff. No. I'm not in trouble.
Matt, did you want a handout or did you just?
I was just gonna put it up.
Okay.
If people want printouts, you can get them. We didn't print it out for everyone to save money, so we don't have to do a budget amendment. Do you wanna put it up on here?
We've lost our audience, don't take it personally.
That's all right.
Is this the same one from last year?
It is not. I've included some new and exciting information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can't wait. You're gonna point out the new stuff?
Maybe you do. Let's see if you're paying attention. So, as was just obviously identified, we've done some of these in the past. Scott had asked if there are some new, they were hear me. I don't think there's anyone
Yeah.
online, right? I need to have the
Oh,
mic.
there's someone online, and I don't know how
I'll use the mic.
to shrink this down, so that's all.
That's okay. Just ask that I do a refresher on open meetings laws, open records requirements, and just the kind of responsibilities of council members in your roles. Some of you being new, haven't had this before, and I think the most important thing is I can go through this and go over the PowerPoint, but if you have any questions, ask them, and we can go into those and answer those questions. So I have the presentation here broken into three main parts. One being, this doesn't have to do with that, but One being open meetings requirements, the other being open records requirements. And the new addition is just some kind of highlights on local municipal officer and employee ethics requirements, because I've been getting some questions on those lately. But generally for the city of Washburn, the common council, your authority, your role is to do everything for the city unless it says somewhere that someone else does that. So the standard is the common council takes care of everything unless it's said otherwise. So first one, open meetings requirements. Next. So the open meeting law policy, what drives all of this is that the basis for an informed electorate and public is that operations of government are supposed to be open to everyone. People should know what we're doing in here. They should know what goes into the decisions that impact their lives and the public operations of our city. For open meetings, there are certain requirements for any meeting of a public body, and that is to give advance notice of each meeting and to conduct the meeting in any business in open session unless there's some specific exemption otherwise. So a lot of this information that we're going over too is not necessarily something that individual council members need to actively do, but it's good for you to know what kind of goes into this. So you see, if there is something that might be a red flag, you know, to point it out, hey, this might not be right.
Is the room tax commission considered a governmental body?
Yes. So, and I think there's a slide on the governmental body, but a governmental body is any entity, board, or committee that actually has some decision-making authority. So if it's solely an advisory committee or an information gathering committee, technically it's not a governmental body.
Okay.
We still notice them because I think we have some that are solely information gathering committees
Like the
or
beautification.
beautification. We still, I think, notice that as a public meeting. Really, that is not a governmental body because they have no decision-making authority. The Room Tax Commission does have decision-making authority. They have certain, I don't recall off the top of my head whether it's statutory or the resolution that approved them, gave them certain decision-making authority, so that is a government body.
So even like the Parks Committee,
Parks Committee has, I do
No.
not believe has any decision-making authority, so they're
Just
technically
recommend.
not a governmental body that would need to be noticed and comply with open meetings laws.
Alright.
We do it to be safe. And
no, it's good for
periodically,
people to know, I'm
Yes,
just saying, like,
definitely.
technically, it's good to know, like, because sometimes we do little subcommittees within our
Yeah.
committees to get together, and like, we don't have to, like, we shouldn't have to public notice those.
legally, you should not have to, but I think periodically there may be an issue or an item or two where council says, yes, the Parks Committee can make this decision. I don't know if that's ever happened, but if that did happen, then the Parks Committee becomes a governmental body that needs to be subject to this. So that's why out of caution and out of best practice, all of these committees, organizations, boards
Okay.
from City of Washburn standpoint, always treat them as if they are governmental bodies.
Okay,
But that determining factor is whether they have the authority to make a decision.
Planning Commission, do they have the authority to make decisions?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
All right, next one. So, and then when does this open meetings law apply? And here, when we have a meeting and a governmental body. And there is your definition of a governmental body, whether it's that board, council, committee, department, public body created by statute or ordinance. So, yeah, in that regard, that answers the question somewhat. And then next one gets into what is a meeting. And this is where it gets a little bit more onto individual council members or committee members to be a little more aware. Meeting is anywhere where there's a convening of members of that governmental body for the purpose of exercising the responsibilities, authority, and power delegated to that body. So that's where essentially if you are meeting or organizing with that group that is designated as that committee or that body, it's presumed to be for public purpose, for that governmental purpose. And here, for it to be that convening of members, it is if there's 1/2 or more of an individual body present, it's presumed to be a public meeting. You can rebut that presumption if it is just gathering for Jen's birthday party, or Tony's birthday party
Tony.
today, yes. But you have to show specifically that that was not for a public purpose. And even if, and just so everyone's aware, even if there's not intended to be a public purpose, best practice that the city follows is to publish a notice of a possible quorum. If Tony were having a birthday party, which he may be, but I wasn't invited, we could publish that as a possible quorum for that meeting.
So for Scott's going away.
Yes, we could publish that, and it may be a good practice to do, to publish as a possible quorum. That council members, a quorum of council may be present at that meeting. Okay.
We have done that on most occasions, like when there's a,
When we do a tour of the city or things like that, I know we always do it then.
yeah. We have that, when there's a chance occurrence that we didn't anticipate, we don't, yes, so.
That's good on that one. If there are any questions at any point, I'm not gonna go into depth because I feel like we've covered a lot of these, but just highlighting some new updates or anything else. So for whether there's a meeting, there's a two-factor test. It's called I have it on the next slide. I'm forgetting that off the top of my head. The Showers test, I think it's called. And that is the purpose of the meeting and the number of the members. So again, that purpose has to be for what the body, who is meeting, what they have the authority to do. And the numbers have to be a sufficient number of members to determine the outcome of that body. That doesn't always have to be a majority, because it's called a negative quorum. There's certain items that require a supermajority or a 2/3 vote. So in that instance, if it were a meeting or a group of members discussing something that required a 2/3 vote, even if only 1/3 of those members got together to discuss that, that would be a quorum, because you could determine the outcome of the governmental action at that point. That's nice, yep. And then so that's the numbers, and then the convening of members you don't all have to be physically present together to have a convening of members. They can be video call, they can be telephone calls, if there's a conference call, that can be a convening of members. Anything sent out in written, like a snail mail, cannot be a meeting, because to define that, a convening of members, it has to be a contemporary or contemporaneous exchange of information and ideas. So in a written communication that's actually mailed out, it doesn't raise to that point. But the biggest issue here is, as I think we've made clear to everybody, is group emails and reply all to when everyone's CC'd.
And you can avoid that by blind carbon copying, correct? Which prevents you
from replying all to everyone, yes. But the best course of action is just not to reply all. If you have an input on some item, like a council update that gets sent out that are very informative, if you have input or something you want to ask, response to that, send it to Scott or Tony or whomever sent it out, and then they can disseminate that response. They can disseminate that information. And as long as it's not coming from one of the members of this governing body, who are each of the council members and the mayor, then it is not considered to be that convening of members. And that's really the biggest red flag there. Just don't reply all when you're responding to any of these items. And even if you don't reply all, if you do just send that response directly back to Scott or Tony or whomever, remember that is still an open record. So that's still, it's not in confidence just because you don't send it to everyone. We'll get to those points later, but any communication like that should be expected to be public knowledge that we have. Excellent, Tom. So walking quorums and multiple meetings, I don't see that we have too much of a problem. I haven't seen this as being a problem here in Washburn, but I've seen some other municipalities getting in problems here where a walking quorum, where there's nothing to prevent 2 council members, that's 7, right? 2 or 3 council members from getting together and discussing something. Typically, that's not a problem because that's not a quorum. But if you have one person who goes and talks to 2 council members, and then that person goes and talks to 2 more, trying to get both of those individual groups to agree on something, that can be a walking quorum, and that can violate the open meetings law. I know we're a small community. You guys talk outside of council meetings. Presumably, every now and then you talk about city business. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you go from one person to another, trying to convince people into voting one way or get their opinion or get their how they're going to vote on an upcoming issue, that's where it could raise a potential concern. So those types of ideas or actions are discouraged. And then the multiple meetings, this happens sometimes when we have a time crunch and some ordinance requires, let's say, plan commission approval and council approval on something. You can have a meeting of 2 governmental bodies at once. Those only need to be noticed as 2 separate meetings if the individual bodies are actually acting at that meeting and in regard to some topic that they have the authority to act on. So let's say that I honestly don't know who's currently on the Parks Committee. Jen. So if there are 2 people, yes, every council meeting has a quorum of Parks Committee members present. But because you're not taking specific individual action on a Parks Committee matter, we don't have to notice it separately as a Parks Committee meeting. It's only when that smaller group is taking specific action within the subset of the larger group that you need to notice it separately. Next one, Tony.
So I have had,
Yep.
we have had plan commission meetings and council meet at
Yes.
the same time.
Yep, and those are on the specific items where by statute or ordinance, it requires plan commission either recommendation or approval and council final action. And those are when we don't have time to have a separate plan commission meeting, or it requires plan commission, some items require a plan commission public hearing and then a council meeting. And those items, when it is specifically required for the plan commission to take action, we do have to give that notice of a separate meeting. And that's totally fine. But if we didn't give that notice, then the action of a council wouldn't be valid because it wasn't previously approved or recommended or forwarded by the plan commission. For the notice for the meetings, that's not something that individual council members necessarily need to be aware of. Something that the city clerk gives a notice of and sets the agenda. The notice is in the agenda. It is required to be placed in 3 places, likely to be seen by the public, and it's required to be sent to the newspaper, but it's not required to be published, actually. Our newspaper does publish them, almost always, but we've had some instances where, believe it or not, the daily press has forgotten to publish notices for certain municipal meetings. That doesn't mean that you can't go forward with the meeting just because it wasn't published. The requirement is that it's sent to them to notice. If something for council members to consider, if when we send out the agenda, you see the agenda and you're looking through it and you see some topic that you have some questions on or something you want to discuss, and the requirement is that that notice gives enough information to the public so that if someone were interested in it, they would know whether they or not they would want to attend. So if you read the agenda and you think, hey, I might want to talk about this item or this topic that's somewhat associated with this agenda item, if you think a reasonable person would know that that was connected with that agenda item, then it's probably okay to include and to discuss that. If you want something to be discussed or action to be taken at the council meeting that might not, a reasonable person might not think, hey, yeah, that's gonna be associated with this agenda item, you should send an email or call the clerk, Scott or Tony or whomever, and say, hey, I just wanna make sure that we'll be able to discuss this item with the agenda that's published. And then they can send it to me or whomever and make a determination about whether we need to broaden the explanation in that agenda or whether it's sufficient as it is. But that's something where individual council members, if you have an idea you know you want to talk about, make sure that it falls within the scope of some of the noticed agenda items at least. That's good. The notice doesn't necessarily need to say whether action will take place on a specific item, but if it says discussion only, then you cannot take action. So we said there are some items where we say discussion, but it can also say discussion and possible action. It doesn't mean that you have to take action. But if you think that there is something that is an action item, it can't say discussion only. Otherwise, that doesn't meet the necessary notice requirements.
It's just been my practice when I'm uncertain to say discussion and action because
Yes,
it's impossible to predict the future.
exactly, and that's the best course because it doesn't require us to actually take action. You are not required to discuss or take action on every item or agenda item contained in the public notice. That isn't required at all. For the agenda and the order listed on the meeting notice, there isn't a requirement. It's best practice to follow the agenda as it's published, but it would, if you go out of order, it does not actually invalidate the public meeting.
And you don't have to amend the agenda?
Not unless there's a specific time listed for a public meeting or public notice, or this is honestly citing to the state statutes. I don't believe our city ordinances have a requirement that we follow the agenda in order.
Okay.
But it is because I guess the thought there being, if people have viewed the agenda and they think, oh, this item that I want to weigh in on is at the end of the agenda, they might not think to tune into the meeting until the second half of it. So without a notice or without a motion to amend the agenda, there could be a potential argument that people were not aware that the council was considering that item earlier. In the case law and the discussion on this, that's never been a successful argument. So it is still best practice, yes, to amend the agenda, but it's not absolutely necessary.
Even that wouldn't notify the person.
No, but it is then any argument that they wouldn't have known would be overcome by that motion to amend.
Okay.
Next up, Tony. So open session requirements. Generally, every discussion of a governmental body should be an open session, open to the public. It's now common practice to have them all also open online to members of the public. The requirement there is that the open sessions must be accessible to the public and should be held in public places. So we can have public open meetings on private premises, but those have to be open to anyone to enter at that time. They can be essentially filmed, recorded, conducted online. You can turn people away if there's overcrowding, but if that's the case, I don't know that we've ever had that. But if that is the case where we turn people away for overcrowding, you have to show that the governmental body took reasonable steps to anticipate the number of people present and didn't intentionally schedule the meeting in such a small place so as to prohibit the public from attending. It's a very rare situation when that would occur, but it possibly could. So generally, they're not, the city and governmental bodies are not required to allow members of the public to speak. We have a public comment period at the beginning of every meeting. That is not required. There are some smaller committee and board meetings where I think we actually don't notice public comment because you don't want that all to happen. If you do, though, notice the public comment period, typically have to allow people who show up to give that comment within any rules or policies that are in place. I think we're pretty good here about sticking to the 3 minutes and allowing people to speak so long as it doesn't get out of hand. But if council ever wants to decide, hey, we don't want a public comment period, that is allowed. Excellent, Tony. Ballots, votes, and records and meeting minutes. So generally, all your votes on everything have to be recorded. It doesn't have to be a roll call vote on everything. Voice vote, vote by unanimous opinion is allowed so long as at the start of the meeting and then for every vote, the minutes show who was present at that meeting. So you can have a unanimous approval so long as the minutes show who was there, because then you can determine who voted in favor and who voted against.
So if we record everything now,
Yes.
so we record and then we take minutes and we vote on minutes. I mean, could we technically just do the recording and post that on our city website and that's good enough? Because that's like a record.
Yeah.
I'm
unsure on that.
I'm just saying.
I can look into it about whether that would take the place of minutes. Do you know, Scott?
I thought there had to be a
Written record, I think, but I don't know if they interpret a written record as to be an audio or a video recording.
Just things are changing. Like
Yes.
I think taking meeting notes and posting them is.
There is a
Maybe
requirement
we're doing
for,
less and less of that in the federal government to save people's time and energy, right? You
Yeah.
write it all down. Actually, if you really wants to know what happened, you listen to the recording and now you can like totally move your little cursor to the section that you want to listen to. It's
So-
just a lot of work, right?
and the requirement for the written record has to show the time when the votes were taken as well. So then people can, if they are watching the video, if they are coming in and looking, you can see when that discussion took place. You can go to that area, or that section.
I'm always looking for ways to,
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't know how many people go back and actually read the minutes. I mean, some people may, but they could also look at the recording. I'm just curious, that's all. Trying to save some time.
Written minutes fulfills this requirement in the next one.
Yeah, you know, the difficulty with the audio is when you are searching records, it's impossible to search
Right.
recordings.
That's where it is the requirement for the written record of all votes that are taken. So if you have a resolution, you have something that's passed, you have to have that written record to show who was in attendance, how many voted for or against, so that you can go back and verify the governmental action.
Okay,
That's
I'm
what
just
that
asking, yeah.
Because your minutes only really need to be votes.
Correct.
Technically.
Who was present and votes.
Correct.
Yep.
But
Yeah, 'cause,
we
I mean,
do
because you get,
more.
these
just
can be our
recording.
minutes right here. He has a little checkbox.
Yes, that's sufficient.
That's
In
sufficient.
some government bodies, some municipalities, that's all that they do is.
I just went to my dad's township meeting when I was
Yeah.
home. That's all they do right there.
And that's where the statutory record is that there's a record of all motions and roll call votes and votes at the meetings. And that applies for both open and closed session, and the minutes of that meeting satisfy that requirement.
Okay.
Again, so long as you know who's present, how many votes or abstentions there were. And that's where the making decisions by general consent is only appropriate for routine procedures such as approving minutes or adjourning, or if there's no actual action taken. I think we do that a lot where we just want to know, council wants to know, or city administration wants to know whether council is comfortable moving in this direction. Those are general consent, those are fine because they don't bind the city to any specific action taken. Next one, Tony. So closed session, again, individual council members don't always or routinely get involved with whether there's closed session or not. But essentially, closed session is only allowed in certain limited circumstances. In there, to do it, we have to specifically state, I think everyone's heard, specifically state the reason why closed session would be allowed. Now, even in most situations, even when closed session may be allowed, it's not required. So there are often times where, yes, it could be allowed to go into closed session to discuss something that has to do with bargaining purposes or things like that would be allowed to go into closed session, but council is by no means required to do that. There are certain personnel issues discussing confidential records that it is required to be in closed session, but those are pretty uncommon. The other thing to know with closed session is that council definitely has wide discretion with who can attend closed session. So if you want closed session with the public works director or anyone else, specify that in the motion and they can be included to stay in the closed session. I don't recall if in our authorization to have virtual attendance, it specifically says that closed session cannot be attended virtually.
Our practice has been that we have allowed it, but we do not record it and make sure that there's nobody else in attendance.
Yep. And that's a good practice. You can specifically, if council ever wanted to, you can say closed session has to be in person. Those are types of things that can be regulated by whether it's an ordinance or a policy or each individual vote to go into closed session. Voting should be done in open session on the actual substance of what was discussed, unless that vote really is required to be in closed session for the purpose of that closed session meeting. And then if we're reconvening into open session, the agenda and the notice must state that it's possible to reconvene in open session to discuss and take action on what was discussed in closed session. That's another one where city staff takes care of all of that, and in my experience has been very good with the city here. Next one, Tony. Examples of allowed closed session subject matter. If there's any judicial, quasi-judicial hearings, I think we've had some of these. This one that since I've been here is required to happen in closed session is when a alcohol operator's license is denied initially. The hearing on whether to grant that approval is required to be in closed session. Unless the applicant specifically consents to it being in open session. So that's the type of judicial or quasi-judicial hearing that could be there. Employment and licensing matters. There's certain of those that are required to be in closed session without the employee's consent. Ones that we use the most when generally come up are conducting public business with competitive or bargaining implications, or conferring with legal counsel on potentially likely litigation. Again, those are not required to be in closed session, but can be. So there are times when council members, if you don't feel that something should be in closed session, even though it might be noticed for it, you do not have to always blanket approve a motion to go into closed session. That's something that can be discussed and is important to be discussed. Next one, Tony. Penalties. Everyone's important or concerned about what might happen if you violate these. Typically, the only penalty for violating the open meetings law is that any action taken is void. You can't, it's not an official government action if it was in violation of the open meetings law. The only time when there's a individual penalty or potential penalty against the city is if they were a knowingly or an intentional violation of the open meetings law. So I think I recently looked and did a search on this, and I think in the last 10 years in Wisconsin, there have been 3 instances of actual enforcement with the penalty enforcement, forfeiture enforcement of open meetings violations. So it's very rare to have those actually be enforced. But they did happen. I think Mercer was one of those issues that came up with their school board. So it's not unheard of, where people try and get around the meeting requirements. The district attorney does have the authority to commence an action and have a fine and a forfeiture against you. Next one, Tony. So, before we move on to public records, any questions about meetings issues, meetings requirements, as we go about that? So the next major issue that everyone is involved with here, and this one is more so, I would say, for individual council members than the meetings requirement, is the public records requirements. Again, the purpose of this is to have an open knowledge for citizens and to know what the government is doing and have people to have oversight on government officials, employees, and the workings of that. Next one, Tony. So there's a presumption for the open records law that every record of a government body, a government official, a government employee is open for review and inspection by the public. That is presumption, and then that can be rebutted or with certain statutes or other considerations. But assume anything you do in your role as city councilor is open to public inspection. Next one. So in considering this, first major question is, what is a record? Pretty much it's anything you do that's written down, recorded, stored, or preserved, regardless of how it was, whether it's a voicemail, recording of a meeting, an email, a text, all of that is a record. Next one. So here's some example of common records that we have: emails, text, voicemails. Everything that you send or receive from a government authority's account is a record, regardless of if it was for a personal purpose. If it was sent or received from your city council email, it is a public record. Doesn't mean that personal emails from your government account have to be released, but it means the first step of whether it is a record. Anything you send or receive from your personal accounts that has to do with your government purpose, with your position here, is a record. So those are important distinctions here to make out. I know the city has now, we do have email accounts for city council members. Jen, your personal email, you're the only one who only has your personal email on the council updates that Scott sends out.
You're totally calling me out?
I am. And the reason I point that out, we'll get to it later. But Dave also has his personal email on the
Oh, so
council
it's just
updates.
not Jen.
But Dave also has his government email account on there. So, and I'll get to the reason why that's important later. But, and I don't know how that gets set, but I looked right before this to see if everyone was using them, and I noticed that. Sorry to point you.
No, it's totally fine. I just haven't switched over, and I deal with records and everything all the time.
Yep, and you're used to it too. So,
Used to it?
well.
Yeah. That's all I do.
So even if you don't create, even if the government body doesn't create a record, it's created by someone else and it's in possession of the government body. And that can be the clerk's office. That can be really, it's anything that you receive for your city council emails. It needs to be saved. It's a public record. So if you have a constituent who wants to send you something, make sure they know if they send it to your government, well, if they send it to you, it's for a public purpose. So that is a public record.
Doesn't
And
matter.
it's
if
open to public records.
Right, doesn't matter if it's your personal or your government, it's all a record.
Yes. Social media postings, I think that the city has done a pretty good job of we have a social media policy and regulating who can use and how the social media accounts of the city are used.
And with that, we do have a service that
That saves them.
Yep.
it saves every post, every comment, even if it gets deleted,
Yes.
it is saved.
Because there are certain instances where the city can delete comments, even though it's questions of First Amendment rights on posting on city Facebook accounts. There are certain times when they can be deleted, but we do have a system that backs all those up. So if someone does make an open records request, we produce all of them, even if they have been deleted. But it's generally, if any individuals are commenting on a city issue on social media, anything that has to do with your position as a city official, you should make clear, if you make a comment, if you make a post, say, this is my individual opinion and not on behalf of the city of Washburn. Then you can say whatever you want. I don't recommend doing that, but.
I thought you just do it.
That is if there's any gray area or borderline issue, whether you're speaking in your capacity as a city council member or your personal capacity, it would be presumed that was a public record. Yeah. Next one. Certain things that are not a record. I think that the most common one here is the drafts, notes, or preliminary documents. And I give the example here as if you've taken notes during a council meeting for your own use, that is not a public record. No one needs to see that. If someone requests notes of council members, they don't need to be produced. But and I have done this a few times, Tom, and I do keep a copy of it. If I slide that note over to you and show you something, that turns into correspondence, and that is then a public record. And when I do that, I make a copy of it and I save it in case there's a request for any of that. Just for things for people to remember. If you are having any of those types of passing notes from one to another, that's a correspondence, needs to be saved.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the issues I often have is like somebody will put draft on top of something, like say we're working on something for the Parks Committee and you put draft on top of it because you're not fully done. That's still a record, even though, because it's a shared document that
Correct.
we're
That turns into a correspondence back and forth.
Turns into a correspondence.
Yes.
So a lot of people try to get away from open records law by putting draft on top of things. That is not, it's a falsity, or what people feel is a way to get away from things. People do it all the time.
Yes.
But so sometimes when people just say like, oh, drafts aren't records, drafts actually can
If
be
you
records.
share a draft
If you
with someone
share
else,
them with
it
someone
becomes a
else.
record.
And often our draft things are shared in committees and stuff. Those are still records.
Correct. That is good to point out. So if someone makes an open records request for all of the park plan, historical park plan documents, that wouldn't need to be produced then if it's a draft. But if they make an open records request for all the correspondence regarding the park plan documents,
Right.
then the drafts that are included in those correspondence are to be sent out.
Which is what people are often looking for,
Yes.
like how you start out with things and how you change and why you actually go on a path. And drafts are the reasons why you do that. And those are open records, just so people are aware.
And that's where yes.
Yeah.
Any published material or things that are generally available for the public isn't necessarily a public record. So that doesn't apply much to individual council members, but in my capacity, I don't have to save every statute that I look up as a public record because it's generally available to the public somewhere else. Purely personal property, and that's where if you send a purely personal email from your city council account, it does not need to be disclosed, but you shouldn't do that. And I'll get into what happens if you do that later. Anything with copyrights or patents can also be potentially protected, but not always. So if you're talking with constituents about concerns that they're sharing something with you that might have a copyright or patent on it, I would recommend that they don't send that to you, refer that to city staff, and they can refer to me if necessary to figure out how best to handle that. Because there are situations where I haven't had the issues with the city of Washburn, but with other municipalities, I've gotten into problems where they have contracts with people who say they're protected information. And there's a court procedure to go and get a court order limiting the release of that information if there is an open records request, but it's best not to get into that because it's a headache. Next one. Personal emails, calls, and documents on an authority's account. So that's where everything you send or receive on your city council email, if there's a request for all correspondence from your email, you need to provide that. The person requesting it doesn't necessarily get purely personal information, but myself or city administrator, depending on who the records clerk is, will need to review what you think is personally or purely personal and issue a statement when we release these records that X items were withheld because they were purely personal, and they have to be specifically described and have language that's in the statute as to how someone can challenge that determination. So because you send, even if you send a personal email from your city council account, maybe the general public isn't gonna get to read it, but I will. So that's something to know, because I would have to review it and tell them why it was withheld.
That's something to know.
Yeah. And that's not up to the individual council members to make that decision about whether or not a personal email or a personal item should be released. That's something that the city clerk or the city attorney needs to make that decision on. Next one. So I think that's what I just went over. Yeah, so anything, oh no, this is a different one. If it's on your personal account.
Like me.
Like you, yes. That's where the content is what matters. If it is anything relating to the government purpose of your position, it is a record.
And I get to make that determination, not you.
No. So if we got an open records request, and this is where I said I was gonna get into this.
All right.
If we get an open records request for all communications of all council members during this certain period, just hypothetically, the initial response and production of those documents would include all of the information, all of the emails from the government accounts. You can make your initial determination about what you think is a public record on your personal account. But for me, if I were making that request and representing someone who really wanted this information, I would see, oh, here's a council member using their personal email account, and you can petition for either an in-person or a court review of all of that personal email to make sure that there's not any additional government records on that personal email account. There's specific statutory provision that applies to that.
And I have seen that down in our agency.
Yes.
Personal phones and
Oh, yeah.
computers.
And if you're sending text, it takes 2 months to get
Oh,
through your phone.
I'm a
on
FOIA
all those
coordinator for my
records.
forest. I've seen plenty of people's stuff.
Yep.
So like, I mean, but typically the person first gets to make the cut.
Yes.
Like I don't
but-
make the cut for them unless, and then if it gets petitioned, we will make a second cut, but typically that person gets to make that
Correct.
cut.
Yes.
Now, the discussion of government emails or government contacts, does that include federal?
Yes, as far as for what, in what context? I'm talking about specifically here, the rules are relating to the Wisconsin open records requirement. The federal open records laws are very similar, but somewhat different.
They're a little different.
Yeah.
Wisconsin record law is actually a little bit more strict
Yes.
than the federal law.
Mhm. But what, I guess you have a specific,
Okay, we're having a meeting, September 13th, down at the Northern Great Lakes Visitor Center. And it is going to be sponsored by the Department of Energy. And we have made invitations to various people in the community, one being Mary. I don't know if she's even responded. I don't know if she's even received.
All I have is a voicemail at this point.
it's a record,
So I shouldn't delete any of my voicemails?
correct, and I'll get to that.
Wow.
I'll get to that point here in a second.
Oh, a note, a record.
There it is. So what entity or who's hosting that meeting or who's convening that?
And that was my question I wrote down was, who is we?
Yes.
So Alexander Kramer, who is from National Renewable Energy Lab, and it is essentially, the fact that Washburn is being focused upon by by NRO and by DOE, First in the Nation community to determine some of the impediments and some of the opportunities relative to applying federal government funds to updating various things to meet the requirements of essentially zero emissions by 2030, 2050.
So are you engaging in that meeting on behalf of or in your role as a city council member for Washburn?
No, I'm not.
So then anything you do there would not be, from your respect,
Okay,
open to public records?
But if we invite Mary as the mayor of this community, then does that change something?
Potentially, yes. If she's going there in her capacity as a mayor of the city of Washburn, just advocate on behalf of the city of Washburn, then any communication regarding that would potentially be subject to open records.
Okay, so she is being invited as such as the mayor.
Yep.
To essentially be one of the, not necessarily one of the speakers, but to essentially welcome, being a welcome person.
So then any correspondence that Mary receives regarding that would be an open record.
Okay.
It doesn't turn the whole event and everything that happens there into an open, a public record for the city of Washburn. But anything specifically relating to or directed towards Mary would be.
Okay, so I don't know quite, I don't have access to all, well, I guess I do, but it's one of these things where we need to talk a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
But we've got, it's amorphous at this point.
Yep. That was good questions. Yeah.
Can we go back to this voicemail thing?
Yes.
I think I'm being bad.
You probably are. Most people are. And this is with my recommendation on any of these, and with Jen's personal email as well. I'm gonna keep calling you out.
Hey, I don't care.
Anything that you receive, in same with any council member, if you get a call on your cell phone and have a voicemail from a constituent talking about city business, that is a public record and is required to be kept for 7 years and is required to be passed on, even if your term's up, required to be passed on to the next council member in your position.
I mean, we don't do that.
I know you don't. And that's one of the big reasons we advocated the A1, A2, aldermanic district emails, because those aldermanic district emails get passed from representative to representative, so the records in those email accounts continue with the position. Because it's not the individual, it's the position.
Yeah, the
What did I
emails,
email for?
Yep.
yeah, the emails I'm okay with, but like the voicemails?
So what I do, and I recommend everyone, if you get anything on your cell phone, text message, or you get anything in a personal email or a voicemail, take it immediately, forward it to your government email account. It's there. You don't need to save it. You don't need to catalog it somewhere else. But then it's preserved in the government email account so that if something ever comes up, it's not a violation.
And I can see that from, I can see it in the email. Can you actually save a voicemail?
Yep, you can send them. If you get a voicemail on your phone, I do it all the time. You can forward it and you can send it to your email and it saves it as an audio file
As an audio
on your email.
Well, how about a text? Can you do the same thing?
Yep. And what I do if I get texts about government business, I respond, first thing you do, respond and say, email this to this account.
Oh.
So that communication doesn't happen on a personal device.
Holy fucking.
Wait, so you are responding to the person who texted you to email
Yes.
it?
Mary, when you and Mary and I communicate a lot by text.
Yeah.
I don't do that to you because I assume, and I know that my phone is a 100% open for public record protection. And I'm okay with that because I actually, through my law firm, we have a backup system that saves all of our email, all of our texts and everything else to protect against that. But if you do get that, if a constituent texts you about a government business, tell them, hey, email me or call me. So that otherwise you can, there is no good way of, it's an app I'm working on inventing. There's no good way of preserving a text chain with the information in it and saving that and sending it somewhere else.
Without taking a ton of
screenshots, yeah.
Our internal phone system,
Mhm.
we don't have the capability to send that to a email.
There should be some potential backup somewhere.
There's a way to archive.
We've never figured that out.
I don't know how you would access
I
them.
mean, our phone system's gotta be
Yeah.
25 years old.
I can get a specific answer on that, but like and we've just done this with our law firm, is if there is a voicemail, we can forward from the phones to email as well, and we preserve them all that way by email. And that's what it should be done.
Awful.
You can, so I think I had it later on here. You can, I think the current minimum timeline for saving of any communication is 2 years. Washburn's ordinance and retention schedule is currently 7 years. So that's something we can talk about, reducing or updating to comply with the new standard. But yeah, that's really, if you get anything on a personal device, recommend just telling people, send it to this account, or email me, or let's meet in person, or call me, so that it doesn't create a written record of that event.
Good luck with that, Tony.
So phone
Yeah.
call.
Phone call is totally fine. Yep. Because that is not a record with any information. Yep. Even though like the minutes or the fact that a call went out is not a record. That's been determined.
So we should change our voicemail messages to say, please don't leave a voicemail because we don't want to create any more records.
Yeah.
If you want to talk to me, then that'll be a record. Wait for me to answer.
Yeah, so that's what the standard is, and it's, I haven't read I don't think there's been any case or guidance on that fact of what if your phone system doesn't maintain these records, but I know that there has been guidance on voicemails on personal cell phones, specifically our public records.
Well, fortunately, we haven't had anyone getting that damn
Yes.
nitpicky yet.
Yeah.
But the number of records requests that we are getting is going up, and they sometimes are just massive because people have learned they can just use us to do their work for them.
Yep.
So,
And it's only increasing with the
It's-
frequency.
In every asset
Yeah.
of used to be like 5% of my job, and now it's like 40% of my job.
Yeah.
Over the past 3 years, how many Freedom of Information Act requests we get.
Yep.
It's insane. Like, people all over the country, all sorts of things.
Another, I guess, recommendation or idea, if you do like texting constituents, something that I do is if I have any correspondence with people that on my phone that involve public records, potentially, I add a note in their contact that says work contact, so that I know I can look through, if there is an open records request, I can just pull out all of those contacts and see, hey, do I need to pull something from this? But just an easy way to get it. Otherwise, your cell phone might spend 2 months in captivity getting reviewed for any type of open record.
So who takes care of the open record stuff for the city? Is it a team effort?
That is a great question. Next slide, Tony.
Oh.
Oh, not quite yet, but we're getting there.
Okay, I'll wait then, great.
Electronic records are essentially everything that is in anything that can be stored and recorded. We've gone over those. Next one, Tony. Okay. You want me to answer your question, or you want to wait?
No, I can totally.
So if you do receive a records request, I don't know if individual council members, to my knowledge, individual council members haven't gotten records requests since I've been city attorney. Do you know of any?
Maybe.
I have
we've done-
requested information
Yes.
from them, but I don't believe anyone has received a direct request.
Individually. So if you do get one, send it to the city clerk, and they'll take care of it. as far as what to do or when to think, hey, did I get an open records request? Someone doesn't need to say specifically, this is an open records request according to Wisconsin statute 19.31. It's, can I have any of these documents? There aren't special words that are required. Oral requests are sufficient. They're still open records requests. If someone asks you for a government record. So if there's ever a question or you're ever like, hey, is this an open records request? Forward it to city clerk, city staff, and say, hey, I don't know if I need to respond to this. That's the best thing to do for you. And that's the bottom part. If you ever get any questions about any records request, forward it on to city staff. Next one, Tony. Council members, individual council members will never ask you to determine what's necessary and how to respond to an open records request, but I think it's helpful just to have an idea of what goes into it. It's a 4-step process. First step, does the record exist? Second step, is there an absolute right to access? Third step, is there an absolute denial of this access to this record? And fourth step, if necessary, is this balancing test. Next one, Tony. Step 1, does the record exist? And that's where, assuming that everything you do relating to government business is a record. You do not need to create documents, and it's only documents or records that are in existence at the time the request was made. So we get a lot of, give me a list of all delinquent property owners or all delinquent utility payment utilities in the city. That's not necessarily a valid open records request unless that list already exists. They can't request that you make it. You can ask, give me a copy of all delinquent utility bills in the city. That's a valid request. But they can't ask you to send them a list of something unless that list creates it or exists independently of that request.
And that would be a nasty request because that would require redactions because
Yes.
that's protected information.
Yep. And that's why you need to forward any request. So you can't require, it doesn't require anything to answer questions like, what's your process for going about this? You don't need to respond to that. It can ask for a copy of any policy that the city has. That's valid, but it doesn't need to, don't have to answer a question. And again, if in doubt, provide a record, provide something you have a question about, and we can review it. Next one, Tony. So their absolute right to access, there aren't many. I don't think that any of you would ever really be involved with any of these. Mainly law enforcement records are absolute, is where the biggest, and certain court records, are where the biggest issue of absolute statutory right to access exists. Next one. Absolute denial of access are mostly personal information, employment, misconduct information, financially identifying information. That's one where an individual council member should never make that determination about whether certain records or certain information is prohibited to be released. That's something where the city clerk or city attorney will make that determination and submit the necessary response. Next one. And then the last one is if it's not absolutely denied from being released or absolutely required to be released, it's a balancing test on whether the public interest in the open and free disclosure of information from the government outweighs the private interest of protecting whatever information is sought to be redacted or not released. Again, there's a presumption of release, but this is something that individual council members won't make that determination on their own. If there is something that you think is in some record that gets requested that needs to be reviewed or produced, that you have a reason why you think it's important that it shouldn't be produced, you can let me or the city clerk know that, and that can be taken into account in this balancing factor, but you can't make that determination on your own. Next one. So responding to a request, this is the answer to your question, Jen.
Okay.
The record custodian is responsible for responding to that request. Washburn has an ordinance where we have designated the city clerk as the record custodian for all records relating to the common council. Individual council members are still the record custodian of their own individual records. However, all those responses, all those requests should go through the city clerk according to the ordinance. If there is a written request, you have to provide a written response. If there's an oral request, that has to be responded to. If it's denied, it has to be responded to in writing. There is no absolute required response time. It's as soon as practical to get a response to an open records request. Typically, if anything is produced or responded to within 10 days, that's deemed reasonable. Some requests are super large and it takes longer. But again, that's not something individual you guys would necessarily do on your own, but just to keep in mind if you do get into those situations. Next one. So the record retention. City of Washburn, we have an ordinance with a record retention policy that generally, it sets a general retention timeline of 7 years. There are certain things that are required to be kept indefinitely, certain things that can be destroyed earlier than that if we give notice to the State Historical Society, but generally you think 7 years for record retention on most things, especially things that individual counselors are involved with. Big part here, it continues to apply after the end of the official's terms, and that's why forwarding any official records to your district's email account that continues on with that position. That way those records are retained, they're there as long as the city maintains those email accounts. And if there is any questions about how to forward these texts or emails